Imagine walking into like this massive ancient Roman audience hall.
Right, a really imposing, intimidating space.
Exactly. And the visual contrast in this room is just, well, it's absolutely staggering.
Oh, definitely. You have all these layers of authority stacked on top of each other.
On one side, you've got the Roman governor of Judea, and he's flanked by 5 military commanders.
And we're not talking low-level guards here.
No, not at all. Each of these guys represents 1,000 heavily armed Roman legionaries. It's a huge show of force.
Right, it's pure, unadulterated imperial power.
And then, sitting right next to the governor, you've got a king and his sister.
Draped in royal purple, I'm sure.
Oh, dripping with wealth. They represent this dynasty that has ruled the region for, generations.
So you have the military might of Rome and the ancient, deeply entrenched wealth of the local royalty.
Exactly, and standing right in the middle of this massive display of power is just, well, it's a single prisoner.
Just one guy.
Just one guy. He's a tent maker, basically. He's battered, and he is quite literally bound in iron chains.
It's the ultimate picture of worldly power versus, total vulnerability.
Right. If you were looking at this scene from the gallery, it would be incredibly obvious who was in control and who was completely at their mercy.
You'd think the people on the thrones hold all the cards. I mean, they make the laws, they enforce the laws with steel, and the prisoners just getting crushed beneath them.
But the reality of this specific historical moment is a complete inversion of that picture.
Which is what makes it so fascinating.
It really is. The people on those thrones are actually trapped in this political nightmare of their own making.
Yeah, they are scrambled.
And the man in chains, he's the one directing the entire narrative.
He's playing chess while they're playing checkers.
He really is. Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating document titled His Unchanging Plan.pdf.
It's a great source text. Very thorough.
It is. And we're zeroing in on a pivotal, incredibly tense legal and political drama recorded in the book of Acts. Specifically, we're looking at chapters 25 and 26.
Right, the trial of the Apostle Paul.
Exactly. And our mission today is to dig into the author's arguments and, the massive theological implications behind all of this.
Because it's not just a history lesson.
No, not at all. We want to look past the surface-level historical drama, even though that history features, actual assassination plots and scandalous royal incest.
It really has everything you'd want in a political thriller.
It does. But we want to extract the real practical principles for you, the listener, about standing firm in faith. We're looking at God's overarching, unchanging plan.
And to do that, the author gives us a really specific theological framework right out of the gate.
Right, these 7 foundational points. And I think we need to lay those out clearly because they frame this entire deep dive.
Yeah, let's run through them. They are essential for understanding the whole dynamic in that courtroom.
So point number 1 from the source. The unbeliever is trapped in a decaying universe.
Right. Everything around them is temporary and falling apart.
Point 2. Death is the great separator and the ultimate enemy.
It's the one thing none of these Roman officials can defeat.
Exactly. Point 3. Death will one day be purged.
A total reversal of the natural order.
Which leads to point 4. Man dies, but God's promises never die.
They are the only permanent thing in that decaying universe.
Point 5. Resurrection is required to actually receive those eternal promises.
Because if you're dead, you can't inherit a living promise.
Exactly. Makes logical sense. Point 6. Jesus, the Messiah, through the line of Judah, is the one who fulfills these promises.
He's the mechanism of the resurrection.
And finally, point 7. Faith in Jesus and absolutely nothing else secures that eternal salvation.
And if you genuinely believe that framework, if you believe resurrection is a guaranteed reality,
it changes everything.
It completely reorients your relationship with fear. A Roman executioner's sword just doesn't carry the same weight anymore.
It neutralizes the only real weapon the empire has against you.
Exactly. It takes away their ultimate threat.
Keep that paradigm in mind because it explains the absolute chess match we are about to watch unfold. So let's set the scene for you.
Right. We need to understand the board before the pieces start moving.
We are in the Roman province of Judea, in the coastal city of Caesarea. It's the administrative headquarters for the Roman government.
Beautiful city. Built by Herod the Great, right on the water.
Yeah, very Roman, very wealthy. And right now, there is a massive transition of power taking place. The previous governor, a man named Felix, has just been recalled to Rome.
And we really need to understand the absolute mess that Felix left behind.
Oh, it was a disaster.
It was. Antonius Felix was famously corrupt and just deeply brutal.
I think the Roman historian Tacitus actually wrote about him, didn't he?
He did. Tacitus has this famous quote where he says, Felix exercised the power of a king in the spirit of a slave.
Wow. That is a devastating critique from a Roman patrician.
It really is. Felix was actually a freedman, a former slave who gained imperial favor, which was rare for a governor. But he was incredibly heavy-handed. He took bribes constantly.
And under his administration, the province of Judea just devolved into chaos.
Total chaos. There were riots. There were zealot uprisings in the desert. The economy was in shambles.
So Rome essentially fires him. They recall him and send in a replacement, a guy named Porcius Festus.
And Festus is walking into a complete powder keg.
Literally. Historians generally consider Festus to be, a much more capable and moderate administrator than Felix.
Yeah, he wasn't known for being overtly corrupt.
Right. But he's stepping into a province that is teetering on the edge of open revolt. He has to establish control, and he has to do it immediately.
Which completely explains his very first move as governor.
Yeah. Tell us about that, because the timeline is super aggressive.
It is. Within 3 days of arriving in the province at Caesarea, Festus just packs his bags again and makes the difficult uphill journey to Jerusalem.
3 days. He doesn't even unpack his moving boxes.
No time. He goes straight to the cultural and religious center of the Jewish people to meet with the high priest and the Sanhedrin, which is the ruling religious council.
It's pure political survival. He needs their cooperation to keep the peace.
Exactly. He's trying to build bridges before the province burns down.
And the Sanhedrin, who are now led by a new high priest named Ishmael, they see an opportunity here.
Oh, they smell blood in the water. They know Festus is desperate for their goodwill.
So at this inaugural meet and greet, this diplomatic summit, they ask him for a favor.
A very specific favor.
Right. They want him to transfer a prisoner from the coastal headquarters in Caesarea back to Jerusalem to stand trial.
And that prisoner is the Apostle Paul,
who has been locked up in Caesarea for 2 whole years at this point.
2 entire years have passed under Felix's delays, and yet the leadership's hatred for Paul is still burning white hot.
It's wild. But it's a very calculated request by the Sanhedrin, isn't it?
Highly calculated. On the surface, they're just asking for a venue change. They're telling Festus, hey, Paul's alleged crimes were religious in nature, so he should be tried by our religious council in our jurisdiction.
Sounds reasonable to a new governor who doesn't know the backstory.
Right. But the historical record makes it clear this was a trap. The source text points out that this was the revival of an old assassination plot.
They didn't want a trial, they wanted an ambush.
Exactly. 2 years prior, a group of zealots had sworn a sacred oath to assassinate Paul on the road. They're just dusting off that exact same playbook.
Because they didn't actually trust the Roman legal process to give them the guilty verdict they wanted?
No, their legal case against Paul was incredibly weak. Under Roman law, you needed hard evidence. You needed credible witnesses.
And the Sanhedrin had local religious jurisdiction, but they didn't have the legal right to execute a Roman citizen, right?
Exactly. Rome reserved the right of capital punishment, the esseus gladii, the right of the sword. The Jewish leaders couldn't just execute him without Rome's permission.
So they decided to bypass the law entirely. They just wanted Paul out on the open road, vulnerable to a hit squad.
It's a pragmatic, brutal solution to their problem.
It's fascinating that the author of the book of Acts, Luke, includes all these incredibly intricate legal and political details.
Right, Luke isn't just writing a spiritual diary here.
No. The source material points out that Luke has an apologetic purpose. He's writing this partly as a defense of Christianity to the Roman Empire itself.
That's a really crucial layer to this text. Luke is meticulously documenting these legal proceedings to demonstrate that Christianity was not in any way an inherent threat to the Pax Romana.
The peace of Rome.
Yes. By detailing these specific trials, Luke is showing that whenever the Romans actually follow their own laws, and whenever they impartially investigated the facts,
they consistently found the Christians innocent of treason or sedition.
Every single time. The narrative clearly argues that the early church only suffered state persecution when Roman politicians compromised their own justice system.
Like when they caved to appease local mobs.
Exactly, or when administrators were simply ignorant of the actual facts of the case.
And to his credit, Festus doesn't immediately cave in Jerusalem. He shows some of that moderate Roman pragmatism.
He does. He pushes back politely. He tells the high priest, no, Paul is being kept securely at Caesarea. I'm heading back there myself shortly.
He essentially says, If this man has done something wrong, your leaders can travel down with me and press formal charges in a proper Roman court.
Festus sidesteps the ambush, completely by accident. He probably didn't even know there was an ambush planned.
He's just following protocol. So the scene shifts back to the coast. We are in the governor's palace in Caesarea.
The official seat of power.
Right. Festus takes his seat on the bema, which is the official elevated judgment seat.
A very intimidating physical structure.
Oh, absolutely. Paul is brought in, and the Jewish leaders who traveled down from Jerusalem just surround him. They unleash this barrage of incredibly serious charges.
But the text is explicit here. They could not prove a single one of them.
Not one. Because under the Roman legal system of the time, specifically this system called the cognitio extra ordinum, the governor served as both judge and jury.
Right. He had immense authority.
But the burden of proof still rested heavily on the accusers, the delators. They had to provide actionable evidence.
You couldn't just stand up and say, he's a menace to society. You had to prove he violated specific codified laws.
And Paul's defense against this barrage is just a masterstroke of legal brevity. He issues this threefold categorical denial.
It's perfectly structured.
He says, I have committed no offense against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar.
Those three specific points are highly deliberate. Paul is systematically dismantling their angles of attack.
Let's break those down by saying he hasn't offended the law of the Jews.
He's refuting the charge of religious heresy.
Right. And by saying he hasn't offended the temple.
He refused the charge of local sacrilege. And that one was huge, because Rome actually cared a lot about temple desecration.
Because it caused riots.
Exactly. Riots disrupt tax collection, and Rome hated anything that disrupted the money flow.
Makes total sense. And finally, and arguably most importantly, by saying he hasn't offended Caesar.
He completely eliminates the charge of maiestas, which is treason against the emperor. That was the deadliest charge you could face in the Roman system.
So he just leaves them with nothing. The prosecutors are standing there empty-handed in front of the governor.
But this is where the ugly political reality crashes right back into the legal reality.
Right, because Festus knows the charges are entirely baseless. He's a smart guy. He knows Paul is legally innocent.
But he is still a brand new governor who desperately needs the favor of the very people standing in front of him making the accusations.
He's in a massive bind. So Festus tries to engineer a compromise. He asks Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?
It's an incredibly dangerous political pivot by Festus.
It really is. He's trying to give the Sanhedrin the optics of a victory. He's offering them home field advantage by moving the trial to their city.
But he's trying to maintain Roman authority by insisting that he will still preside over the trial as the judge.
Wait, let's look closely at that dynamic for a second, because something is weird there.
Okay, what do you mean?
Festus is the highest-ranking official in the entire province. Why is he asking a prisoner for permission to change the venue? Why doesn't he just order the guards to pack Paul up and transfer him?
Because Paul is a Roman citizen.
Right.
That changes everything. A provincial governor had near absolute authority over non-citizens, who are called the peregrini. He could do whatever he wanted with them.
But a Roman citizen had specific, heavily protected legal rights.
Exactly. Festus cannot simply hand a citizen over to a hostile local council without navigating a massive legal minefield. He needs Paul to voluntarily waive his rights and agree to the transfer.
It's a terrifying moment for Paul. I mean, think about it like a chess match.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Festus is feeling the pressure from the Sanhedrin pressing in on his king. So to relieve that pressure, he attempts a gambit. He politely tries to sacrifice upon Paul by asking him to walk into a venue change that is, in reality, a death trap.
A trap Festus probably doesn't fully understand, but Paul definitely does.
Exactly. But Paul sees the board perfectly. He doesn't play defense. He executes a devastating countermove that completely removes Festus's jurisdiction over him.
The ultimate trump card.
He says, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. I appeal to Caesar.
Provocatio ad Caesarem. It is arguably one of the most powerful phrases in ancient jurisprudence.
But wait, I have to stop you there because I think a lot of people misunderstand this moment.
How so?
Well, when you read this just kind of casually in passing, it sounds like a desperate panic move.
Oh, like he's just out of options.
Yeah. Paul has been rotting in a cell for 2 years. The new governor is clearly corrupting the process to appease a mob. And Paul just screams, I appeal to Caesar, as this sort of last-ditch, Hail Mary effort to survive. Is that what the source says is happening here?
It's a really natural assumption, But the author points out that it's completely incorrect. The
Oh.
text heavily implies this was not a panic move at all. It was a deeply strategic, legally unassailable right.
Okay, unpack that for us.
The right of provocatio was enshrined in Roman law, tracing all the way back to the Lex Julia de Vi Publica. It essentially guaranteed that any Roman citizen facing severe punishment or an unfair trial by a provincial magistrate could bypass that local authority and appeal directly to the emperor.
So it was the ultimate trumping mechanism over local political corruption.
Exactly. And it's strictly enforced.
Yeah.
We actually have historical records, like the letters of Pliny the Younger.
Oh, right, when he was governor of Bithynia?
Yes. When Pliny was dealing with early Christians decades later, he executed the non-citizens. But he explicitly noted in his official reports to the Emperor Trajan that he had to separate the Roman citizens and send them to Rome for trial. He couldn't touch them once they claimed that right.
Wow. So the moment Paul invoked those words, Festus was paralyzed.
Festus lost all legal authority to condemn him, to release him, or to transfer him to Jerusalem. His hands were tied.
The gavel essentially comes down. The trial in Caesarea is immediately over.
It's done.
But let's look at the theological architecture underneath this legal maneuver, because this connects right back to the core framework we talked about.
God's unchanging plan.
Yes. Paul had been wanting to preach the gospel in Rome for years. He had literally written a letter to the Roman Church expressing this deep desire to get there.
And it seemed impossible from a prison cell in Judea.
But now, through this ancient, highly bureaucratic legal mechanism, he has just secured a Roman-funded, heavily guarded, one-way ticket to the capital of the empire.
It's brilliant. And the author highlights that this is where we see the concept of God's unchanging plan operating in real time.
We usually tend to look for divine intervention in, like, the miraculous, right?
Seas parting, fire falling from the sky, that sort of thing.
Yeah. But the narrative here suggests that God's sovereignty is so absolute that he can weave his purposes right through the middle of corrupt political compromises and complex secular laws.
He uses a pagan empire's judicial loopholes to transport his messenger exactly where he needs to go.
It perfectly illustrates the idea that while humanity operates in this decaying universe of political favors and assassination plots, God's promises are inexorable.
He doesn't have to bypass human structures. He commands them.
So this appeal creates an immediate massive shift in the room. For Festus, his initial reaction was probably just pure relief, right?
Oh, absolutely. He confers with his legal counsel just to make sure the appeal is valid and properly invoked.
And once they confirm it, he makes the official pronouncement, "To Caesar you have appealed. To Caesar you shall go."
Which solves his short-term problem perfectly.
He didn't have to anger the Sanhedrin by acquitting Paul, and he didn't have to break Roman law by handing a citizen over to a lynch mob. He just washed his hands of the whole thing.
Yeah, his short-term problem is solved. But he wakes up the next morning facing a massive, career-threatening administrative crisis.
Oh, the bureaucratic nightmare. Because by law, when a governor sent an appealed case to Rome, he couldn't just put the guy on a boat.
No, he had to send a formal written report called a literae demissorie.
He had to explain to the emperor exactly what the charges were and why the case was being sent up the chain.
But Festus doesn't have any actual charges.
Right. The Jews couldn't prove anything.
So he has just agreed to send a Roman citizen to the emperor, who happens to be Nero, by the way, without a single shred of provable evidence that the man has committed a crime.
If Festus sends a blank report to Nero basically saying, "Hey, here's a guy, not really sure what he did, but he wanted to see you," he risks looking utterly incompetent.
And Nero was not exactly known for his patience with bumbling provincial governors.
No, he was famously unstable. So it is the ultimate middle management panic for Festus.
He is sweating.
He needs a cover story. Or at the very least, he needs a coherent explanation of the religious nuances that he completely doesn't understand.
And as if on cue, the absolute worst but functionally the most qualified people imaginable arrive at his palace to offer consulting services.
The Herodian royalty, King Agrippa II and his sister Bernice.
Their arrival completely changes the dynamic of the story.
It really does. If we are going to understand the tension of what happens next, the source material argues that we have to understand who the Herodian dynasty actually is.
They're not just visiting dignitaries. They are the generational antagonists of the New Testament narrative.
Their track record is basically a highlight reel of opposition to God's plan.
Let's trace it back.
You start with the great-grandfather, Herod the Great. He is the king who ordered the slaughter of the infants in Bethlehem, explicitly trying to assassinate the newborn Jesus.
A horrific legacy. Then you have his son, Herod Antipas.
He's the one who had John the Baptist beheaded at a dinner party to appease his wife, and he's also the one who mocked Jesus during the trial right before the crucifixion.
Then you move to the next generation, Agrippa I. He's the father of the man who is currently walking into Festus's palace.
And what did Agrippa do?
He executed the Apostle James with a sword, and he threw the Apostle Peter in prison.
So much blood on their hands. And now we reach the end of the line. Agrippa II is the last of the Herodian kings. He brings his sister Bernice with him to Caesarea.
And their presence in this text introduces a level of moral decay that actually shocked even the Romans.
Which is saying something.
It really is. The ancient historian Josephus wrote extensively about them. The rumors of their incestuous relationship were literally the open gossip of Rome.
The Roman poet Juvenal even mocked them in his satires, didn't he?
Yes. Bernice had been widowed. She moved in with her brother Agrippa, and the scandal became so loud that she temporarily married another king, Polemo of Cilicia, just to quiet the rumors.
But the author notes she quickly abandoned him and went right back to living with her brother.
They are the absolute embodiment of the decaying, corrupt universe we talked about in the framework.
But to Festus, their moral failings are completely irrelevant. He doesn't care. He sees them as a political lifeline.
Because despite their personal lives, Agrippa II is a favorite of the emperor. And more importantly, Rome has granted him supreme authority over Jewish religious matters.
He actually had the power to appoint the high priest, right?
He did. And he controlled the temple treasury in Jerusalem. He is the ultimate subject matter expert on Judaism.
He understands the labyrinth of Jewish theology that Festus finds completely incomprehensible. So Festus pulls Agrippa aside in private and essentially vents all his frustrations.
He summarizes the trial for the king.
And his explanation is one of the most revealing moments in the entire text. It shows exactly how a secular Roman mind processed the gospel message.
It's a fascinating look at the cultural disconnect.
Festus tells Agrippa that when the accusers stood up in court, they didn't charge Paul with any of the actual crimes he expected. No sedition, no murder, no treason.
Religious squabbles.
Exactly. Festus says they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion, and then he delivers this incredible line. He says the dispute was, quote, "and about a certain Jesus who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive."
It is a stunning reduction of the gospel.
Right. Festus is looking at a controversy that has sparked massive riots, assassination plots, and political upheaval across his entire province.
And he concludes that it all boils down to an argument about a dead carpenter from Galilee.
Because to a Roman, death was a permanent one-way door.
Exactly. The Roman and Greek philosophical consensus was that bodily resurrection was absurd. It was offensive to their intellect.
I think you see that in Greek mythology, right?
Yes, when the Greek god Apollo supposedly founded the court of the Areopagus in Athens, he declared that once a man dies and the earth drinks his blood, there is no resurrection.
Hades was the final destination, period.
So Festus cannot fathom why anyone would risk their life, let alone start a massive riot, over the demonstrably insane idea that a man had bodily returned from the grave.
It's just nonsense to him. But Agrippa isn't a pagan Roman. He operates within the Jewish theological framework.
He understands the massive implications of a resurrection claim.
Because if Jesus actually rose from the dead, it means he is the promised Messiah, which means the entire religious power structure of the Sanhedrin is obsolete.
Agrippa is fascinated. He tells Festus, "I would like to hear the man myself."
And Festus, who is just thrilled to finally have an expert willing to help him write his report to Nero, says, "Tomorrow you will hear him."
Which sets the stage for what is probably the most spectacular, ironic courtroom scene in the ancient world.
The next day, Agrippa and Bernice arrive at the audience hall, and the text emphasizes that they entered with great pomp.
They don't just quietly take their seats in the back.
No, they're putting on a display of absolute dominance.
The author details that they arrive flanked by military tribunes. The Greek word used is chiliarchs, meaning commanders of 1,000 men.
And there are 5 of these commanders stationed at Caesarea.
Which means there is a military presence representing 5,000 Roman soldiers in the room.
Alongside them are all the prominent, wealthy men of the city. It is an overwhelming show of force and wealth.
The marble columns, the purple robes, the polished armor glinting in the light.
And then Festus gives the order, and Paul is led in. One man in a rough tunic, bound in iron chains.
The contrast is just jarring.
The governor stands up and addresses the crowd, pointing at Paul, saying that the whole Jewish community has petitioned him about this man, shouting that he ought not to live any longer.
And then Festus publicly admits his own incompetence to the entire room.
He does. He tells the crowd that Paul has appealed to the emperor, but that he, Festus, has nothing definite to write to his lord about the prisoner.
Let's pause on that word Lord for a second, because the author points out that the irony here is incredibly rich.
Oh, the Greek word kurios, right?
Yes, Festus uses the word kurios to refer to the Emperor Nero. Kurios implies supreme authority, absolute majesty.
And in the Roman imperial cult, it carried the literal weight of deity.
Festus is standing there, acknowledging Nero as the ultimate god king of the universe, while parading Paul around as a helpless victim of the state.
But the underlying theological argument of the text is that Festus has the power dynamic completely backwards.
Completely inverted. Festus thinks Nero's the Kyrios, but Paul is the ambassador of the true Kyrios, the risen Jesus.
It makes you ask a really difficult question, though, as a listener trying to apply this.
What's that?
If Paul represents the true king of the universe, why is God allowing his messenger to be publicly humiliated like this? Why let him be a spectacle for a corrupt politician and an incestuous, scandal-ridden king?
It's a profound question about the nature of suffering and divine providence. And the source material points directly back to a prophecy made by Jesus years earlier.
In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21.
Exactly. Jesus explicitly told his followers that before the end comes, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake.
But then Jesus adds the crucial purpose clause. He says, this will be your opportunity to bear witness.
Your opportunity to bear witness. This isn't a tragic accident. It's a highly orchestrated divine appointment.
Mind-blowing. God orchestrated the corruption of Felix, the legal panic of Festus, the assassination plot of the Sanhedrin, and the morbid curiosity of King Agrippa.
All of it.
All to assemble the most powerful people in the region into one room, lock the doors, and force them to listen to the gospel.
The true power in that room isn't the 5,000 soldiers represented by the chiliarchs.
No.
It's the prisoner holding the eternal promises.
And that realization completely dictates Paul's behavior when Agrippa finally looks at him from his throne and says, you have permission to speak for yourself.
Because a normal person in that situation, well, they would mount a desperate legal defense.
Of course. They would point out the procedural errors, they would beg for clemency, they would try to flatter the king into releasing them.
But Paul stretches out his hand, and he doesn't deliver a legal defense at all.
He turns the courtroom into a pulpit. Because functionally, Paul is completely immune in this room.
That's the beauty of the appeal to Caesar.
Right. Festus has no power to condemn him here. This is purely a fact-finding hearing for the report. Paul knows he's going to Rome no matter what.
So he looks at Agrippa, and he doesn't see a terrifying judge. He sees a man trapped in darkness who desperately needs the light.
Paul's speech is just a masterpiece of rhetorical strategy and theological depth.
It really is. The author breaks down how he starts by establishing common ground. He acknowledges Agrippa's deep familiarity with all the Jewish customs and controversies.
Then he leans heavily into his own Orthodox credentials. He reminds the room that he lived as a Pharisee, the strictest sect of their religion.
Why do you think he starts with his resume as a Pharisee? Why not just jump straight to Jesus?
Because he has to dismantle the accusation that he's leading a rogue, heretical cult. He is framing his current belief in Jesus not as a departure from Judaism, but as the ultimate logical climax of it.
He says, I stand here on trial because of my hope in the promise made by God to our fathers.
He is arguing that the resurrection isn't a new religion, it is the fulfillment of the oldest promise.
Which anchors right back to the theological framework we discussed at the very beginning.
God's promises never die, and resurrection is required to receive them.
And then Paul looks around this room, a room filled with skeptical Jewish royalty and cynical Roman military commanders, and he drops a massive, challenging, rhetorical question.
He asks, why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead?
It's a brilliant philosophical trap.
It is. He is exposing the cognitive dissonance of everyone in the room who claims to believe in the God of the Old Testament.
He's essentially saying, you believe God created the entire universe out of nothing. You believe he parted the Red Sea. You believe he holds the breath of every living thing.
So logically, why is reanimating a physical body the one miracle you absolutely refuse to accept?
It challenges their definition of an all-powerful God. If God is truly God, a resurrection shouldn't be a stumbling block.
And from that logical challenge, Paul pivots to his personal testimony. He takes them to the road to Damascus.
He doesn't hide his past either. He fully admits that he used to be the aggressor.
He talks about how he locked up believers, cast his vote for their execution, and tried to force them to blaspheme.
He was essentially a religious terrorist. He operated with extreme zeal, but zero actual knowledge of God's plan.
And then, while traveling to Damascus with the full authority of the chief priests to hunt down more Christians, heaven violently intervenes.
A light brighter than the midday sun flashes around him. Everyone falls to the ground.
And Paul hears a voice speaking to him in Aramaic. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads."
That phrase, kick against the goads, the source material highlights this as one of the most vivid and visceral metaphors in the ancient world.
It is such an evocative image. Explain the context for the listener.
A goad was a heavy wooden stick with an iron spike on the end, used by rural farmers to drive oxen.
Right. If a massive beast decided to be stubborn and rebel against the farmer's direction, it might kick violently backward.
But in doing so, it would just drive its own leg right into the iron spike.
The farmer wasn't injured. The ox simply mutilated its own flesh in a futile attempt to resist the inevitable.
It perfectly captures the futility of fighting God's unchanging plan. The narrative implies that God had been goading Paul, directing him toward this exact purpose long before the Damascus Road encounter.
Paul's violent persecution of the church was his way of kicking backward. But he wasn't stopping the spread of the gospel. He was only destroying his own soul.
And how applicable is that concept right now?
Oh, it's incredibly applicable. We constantly exhaust ourselves, stress ourselves out, and actively damage our own peace by violently kicking against the circumstances God uses to guide us.
We fight the goads, and we just end up bleeding. It's the ultimate banging your head against a brick wall.
But the grace in this divine encounter is astonishing. Jesus doesn't strike Paul dead for his rebellion.
No, he repurposes him. He gives him a divine commission.
He tells Paul to stand up, and he appoints him as a servant and a witness. And the job description Jesus gives him is just incredible.
Let's hear it.
He says, "I am sending you to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me."
That commission is a direct reflection of the theological framework we established at the start.
Notice the transitions from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God.
It's an extraction mission. Humanity is trapped in the decaying universe under the power of the enemy, and the gospel is the mechanism of rescue, secured entirely by faith.
Paul tells Agrippa, "I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision." He explains that he simply went out and preached exactly what the ancient prophets and Moses said would happen.
That the Messiah must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light to both the Jews and the Gentiles.
Paul is proving his absolute legal and theological innocence. He's just reading the ancient script out loud.
And this is the moment the tension in the room finally snaps.
Yeah, Paul has just delivered a logically airtight, prophetically rooted defense of a bodily resurrection and a universal salvation that even includes the pagan Romans.
The audience simply cannot handle it. The cognitive dissonance short-circuits their minds.
We see this immediate visceral reaction from the Roman side of the room first. Festus, the pragmatic, composed governor, completely loses it.
He interrupts Paul, shouting at the top of his lungs in front of the king, the commanders, and the entire aristocracy.
He yells, "Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you mad."
The Greek word Festus uses is mania. He literally thinks Paul is experiencing a psychotic break.
And from a strictly secular Roman worldview, Festus's reaction makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Think about it from his perspective. Paul is a highly educated man, fluent in Greek, legally brilliant.
Yet he is willing to rot in a dungeon and risk execution over the belief that a crucified man from a backwater province is now the immortal ruler of the universe.
To Festus, that isn't faith. That is clinical insanity.
But Paul's response is a masterclass in emotional regulation. He doesn't yell back.
He remains completely centered.
He calmly and respectfully says, "I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking true and rational words."
And then Paul executes an absolutely devastating rhetorical pivot.
He completely ignores the shouting governor. He realizes Festus lacks the theological software to process the message.
So he turns his attention entirely to the man sitting next to Festus, King Agrippa.
Because Agrippa knows the prophets. Agrippa understands the stakes.
Paul looks right at the king and says, "For the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. Do you believe the prophets, King Agrippa?"
And before Agrippa can even formulate an answer, Paul corners him. I know that you believe.
It is a breathtaking political trap. The author really emphasizes this. Paul has just backed the most powerful Jewish authority in the empire into an impossible corner.
Let's look at the mechanics of this trap for a second.
Okay, let's break it down.
If Agrippa answers, yes, I believe the prophets, he is implicitly validating Paul's entire argument that Jesus is the fulfillment of those prophets.
Which is bad enough for him politically.
Oh.
But even more dangerously, he publicly contradicts Festus.
Right. Festus just screamed that Paul is a lunatic. If Agrippa sides with a lunatic, he deeply damages his relationship with the Roman governor who controls his territory.
But if he chooses the other option and says, "No, I don't believe the prophets," he completely self-destructs.
His entire authority, his right to appoint the high priest, his influence over the Jewish people, it all rests on his public identity as a pious protector of the Jewish faith.
If he denies the prophets, he loses his kingdom.
He is caught between Roman optics and Jewish credibility. It's a lose-lose scenario. So Agrippa deploys the classic maneuver of a cornered politician.
He evades.
He attempts to deflect the tension with sarcasm. He says to Paul, in a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian?
He's trying to laugh it off, like, do you really think you can convert me with a 5-minute speech?
He's trying to regain the upper hand and reassert the power dynamic of the room.
But Paul's response cuts through all the sarcasm and all the political maneuvering. It reveals the absolute core of his character.
Paul looks at this corrupt, scandal-ridden king, a man whose family has literally murdered Paul's friends, and says, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am.
And then he lifts his arms, and the chains rattle.
Except for these chains.
It is an incredible moment of genuine compassion, except for these chains.
Paul isn't angry. He isn't bitter. He looks at the people who hold his life in their hands, and he pities them.
Because he knows he holds the eternal promises, and they are just grasping at dust.
He wants them to experience the freedom of the resurrection. He just doesn't want them to have to endure the physical suffering he is currently experiencing.
He views his chains as a platform to save them, not as a punishment for himself.
And that statement is the climax of the hearing. The room simply cannot sustain the moral weight of what Paul has just done.
The text says the king rose, and the governor, and Bernice, and those who were sitting with them. They literally just stand up and walk out.
The hearing is abruptly over. They flee the room.
They retreat to their private chambers to deliberate. And their conclusion is unanimous.
They look at the evidence, they look at Roman law, and they agree. This man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment.
He is completely legally innocent.
And then Agrippa delivers the final verdict, the line that hangs over the entire narrative. He turns to Festus and says, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar.
Could have been set free. It is a haunting phrase if you view it purely through a secular lens.
Because it sounds like a tragedy. It sounds like Paul made a massive tactical error.
Like he shot himself in the foot.
Yeah. If he had just held his nerve, if he hadn't played the provocatio card back in the previous trial, Agrippa would have declared him innocent and he would have walked right out the front doors of the palace a free man. Did Paul ruin his own chance at freedom?
Absolutely not. And this is where the theology of God's unchanging plan synthesizes everything we've discussed today.
Okay, lay it out for us.
If Paul had been set free in Caesarea, what would have actually happened? He would have walked out those doors and straight into the waiting daggers of the Sanhedrin's assassins.
Oh, right. The ambush.
Or, at best, he would have spent the rest of his life as a traveling preacher in the eastern provinces, constantly looking over his shoulder.
He never would have made it to Rome.
Exactly. Releasing Paul in Judea was never God's objective. God's stated plan, the prophecy Jesus gave Paul, was that he must bear witness in Rome.
The appeal to Caesar wasn't a mistake, it was the divine mechanism.
God used Paul's legal status as a citizen, Festus's political cowardice, and the ironclad nature of Roman appellate law to guarantee that the Roman Empire itself would safely transport Paul across the Mediterranean.
He didn't just get to Rome, he got there under the armed protection of the very empire that was trying to suppress his message.
God's definition of freedom and our definition of freedom are often completely different. We view the chains as the obstacle. God used the chains as the ticket.
The chains were the ticket. God's plan completely overrides our understanding of what a good outcome looks like in the moment.
We look at the decaying universe, we see the corruption, we see the unfairness, and we panic.
We think the people holding the swords are driving the narrative.
But they aren't. The hidden hand of providence is always moving. The true power in any room is rarely the person wearing the crown or holding the gavel.
And that leaves us with a deeply challenging thought for you to consider as we wrap up today's deep dive.
Let's hear it.
We've watched God utilize corrupt politicians, scandalous royalty, ancient legal loopholes, and years of unjust imprisonment to position his messenger exactly where he needed to be.
He took the very things that look like absolute disasters and repurposed them as the road forward.
It forces a massive shift in how we view the obstacles in our own lives.
It really does.
So ask yourself, what unexpected, perhaps deeply painful goads or chains are you experiencing right now?
What are the limitations, the unfair circumstances, or the bureaucratic nightmares that are exhausting you?
We spend so much energy kicking against the iron spikes, trying to force our own definition of freedom. But what if you stopped kicking?
What if the very things you view as a prison are actually the exact tools God is using right now to position you for his ultimate purpose?
Keep your eyes open to that hidden hand and keep turning toward the light. We'll see you next time.